When the kids are little, sometimes there's nothing more difficult than road trips. They get cranky, they get loud, it can be difficult. And when our kids were little, sometimes we go and we visit my in-laws, and it was about a 15-hour drive. And we decided the best way to do it was just to bomb it. We'd jump in the car, we'd roll down the windows, we'd turn up the radio, and we would just drive. And it didn't matter how loud they got, it didn't matter how mad they got, it didn't matter how much they fought, we just kept driving. The only time we stopped was for gas. And that would go okay for me back then until I'd hit around hour 11 or 12. Then you start seeing things. It starts to get tough. Usually we were getting to kind of the late hours of the evening. And it's amazing how that hum of the road can just lull you to sleep. And I would chew sunflower seeds and I'd turn on the radio and I'd stick my head out the window. But you know what woke me up the most? Rumble strips. You know the feeling. You'd be driving down the road, you start to doze off a little bit, maybe your car drifts, you hit those strips and you're awake again, and you realize that maybe it's time to just take a break at a gas station and wake up a little bit. Those rumble strips are so important. They keep you out of the ditch. They remind you that you're starting to fall asleep. You see, in life, we need rumble strips. It's amazing how the rhythm of life can kind of lull us to sleep, and we can fall into the trap of believing that this world is never going to end. But then God inserts those rumble strips. He gives us some difficulties, some struggles. He gives us the signs of the times we're going to look at today, and they're a reminder of the fact that this world is not going to last forever, that Jesus is coming back. They wake us up to see life as it really is. In our lesson today, we're going to see the disciples, they needed rumble strips. In all places, they needed it at the temple. They were so impressed with this building, so impressed with its size and its grandeur, that they forgot that this building, along with everything else, was passing away. And so we read this exchange in Matthew 13. It becomes or Mark 13 becomes the opportunity to talk about the signs of the times, which we'll be looking at today. It says, as Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what a magnificent building. Do you see all these great buildings?" Jesus replied. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." The disciples are so impressed with this temple. It's as if they were falling asleep at the wheel. They were forgetting that this was temporary, that heaven was their home. And so Jesus told them this whole temple would be destroyed, not one stone left on top of another. And the disciples are shocked. They come to Jesus with two questions, and those two questions become the foundation for his discussion of the signs of the times. The first question is this: tell us when these things will happen. And the second question they ask is, and what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled? You see, the first question was about when is the temple going to be destroyed, and the second question is a little tougher maybe to understand from Mark, but Matthew makes it pretty clear. Look how Matthew records that question. He says, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? You see, the first question is about the temple and its destruction. The second question is about Jesus' return on Judgment Day. And what will be the signs of his return? And in your study, you're going to have an opportunity to look at the signs of the times. But it's important to remember something. Those signs of the times are not meant to work as a predictor. It's not meant to be the kind of thing where you look at what's happening in the world and you can tell that Judgment Day is coming at this or that time. They serve as rumble strips. They're constant reminders that wake us up to the fact that this world is passing away and that heaven is our home. As you look through these verses, you're going to have an opportunity to see all these different signs of the times that are happening in our world and to discuss how they have a way of waking you up, the valuable purpose they serve. But you'll probably notice a sudden change in the conversation. You see, in verse 14, Jesus goes from answering the second question about the signs of his return on Judgment Day, and he goes to answering the first question about the destruction of the temple. And here's what he says. When you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or enter the house to take anything out. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that this will not take place in winter, because those will be days of distress unequaled from the beginning, when God created the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. You see, the destruction of the temple would be the event in the life of that generation. It would be their major rumble strip, the thing that reminded them that this world is passing away. And it's the historians at the time, Josephus, estimated 1 million people were killed when the Romans came, destroyed that temple, and destroyed Jerusalem. Tacitus estimated it was more about 500,000, but either way, it was the great tragedy of their lives. And we know from Eusebius, one of the church historians, that the people took heed of this warning, that when they saw the Romans coming, they fled to the hills to survive. You see, this world is passing away. And the very temple that so impressed them, that deceived them into believing that this would always be here, will be trampled in their very lifetime. As a reminder that we're not in heaven yet. And then Jesus, he just fast forwards to Judgment Day in kind of an Old Testament way. This would happen a lot, where two events would be spoken about as if they were right next to each other in history, but it's called a prophetic perspective. And we see the same thing. If you look at the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains, for example, you'll see one peak and then another. And it'll look as if they're right next to each other, but when you get there, you realize there's all this distance in between. It's the same with these two events. The destruction of the temple and the end of the world are pictured if they're right next to each other, but just like in the Old Testament, there's a great gap of time in between. And the point isn't so much how long that gap of time is, but to be ready for those days. Here's what Jesus says. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or look, there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I've told you everything ahead of time. But in those days following that distress, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he'll send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. You see, Jesus fast forwards to the end, and he tells them something. You're not going to miss that day. When Jesus returns on Judgment Day, everybody will see it, and everything you see around you is going to disappear. And so then he uses this event to teach us from two parables about what this means for us now. And the first parable we read in Mark 13, verse 28. It says, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it's near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. The first way he applies and talks about what this knowledge of Judgment Day means for us as Christians is an encouragement for us to treat these signs of the times the same way we treat the signs of spring, as a reminder that summer is coming. You see, when you see all these events happening, when you see the signs of the times playing out in our headlines, he wants us to learn the same lesson, that Jesus is coming, to see what is about to take place, to be ready for that day. And he talks about readiness in the next parable. It says, but about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone. Watch. You see, he makes a point that you're not going to be able to predict Judgment Day from these signs of the times, but from the first parable you see that just like you recognize the signs of spring and see that summer is coming, so also a Christian is going to see the signs of the times and know that Judgment Day is coming. But the second lesson is warning us not to get caught up in the when, but the what. To be ready for the day that Jesus comes back, and we are ready by doing the things he's called us to do until his return. Those two parables stand out as examples of what it means to be ready for his return. And in the next section in Mark 14, you're going to have an opportunity to see a group of people with Jesus in their midst, and we'll see some who are ready and some who are not. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about what happens when you're not ready. We read from Mark 14. Now the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away. And the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you'll always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. It's amazing how in one story you can see people who are both ready and so not ready. You see the religious leaders of the people where all they care about is arresting Jesus and getting rid of him for the sake of political expediency. But they tell themselves not during the feast because they don't want to cause a ruckus. The consequence? They can't control their own evil. And they can't help themselves from arresting Jesus even in the midst of the Passover and sacrificing him and killing him on his most holy day. Then you see the others, which we know from Matthew are the disciples, and they think it's such a waste of money. All they think about is the here and now. They don't think about what it means to give God their best. You see Judas Iscariot, who's so jaded, he decides to use this as an opportunity to make a buck. The only one who's ready is this woman, who may not have been able to tell you exactly what was going to happen in the next couple days, but she knew this: Jesus was her Savior. And she knew that occasion deserved her best, and so she gave it to him. And she showed what it means to live a life that is ready. In your study, you're going to have an opportunity to talk about these different examples, to talk about how we can fall into some of those same traps, and to talk about how God builds in these road bumps, these signs of the times to wake us up so he can prepare us for his return through word and sacrament. God's blessings on your study.